The Raised in Ricky Sanchez podcast is presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app. Use promo code RTRS. Brought to you by Nature Pet Foods. Slow cooked with Superfusion. Get 20% off your first order at Chewy by using the promo code RTRS20. And Adam Kasabi, the official realtor of The Process. Go to processrealtor.com. On the pod today, we had an incredible conversation with Chuck Klosterman. We covered a lot of stuff, Mike.
Wide ranging.
Yeah. From the Sixers, Ben Simmons, the bubble, COVID-19, The Shining, Aliens, what else? Portland, Grantland. We talked about Grantland. Bill Simmons. We asked him about Bill Simmons.
You'll hear it. You'll listen.
Yeah, it's really good.
I do think that people should be aware going in that he was drinking, if you're not watching it on YouTube, he was drinking multiple Miller High Lifes the entire time. So sort of just factor that into your calculus of how you enjoy this. You'll be hearing him. I think you'll hear the drink, but seeing him do it, I think, was a real treat for us. Yeah,
because it was a surprise. He shows up. I recommend watching this in YouTube because during the Kasabi commercial, he just pops on in the middle of it, and it was I don't know, with the beer.
The champagne of appearances.
Yep. So he is on because his book,
Raised in Captivity.
Yeah. Raised in Captivity is out on paperback now. And you can get it at the Midtown Scholar bookstore. Just go online, Google Midtown Scholar. Use code RTRS when you check out. Choose Media Mail. You'll get free shipping, and they'll give you an extra Chuck Klosterman book in addition to. And I'm doing a Q&A with Chuck that you can get your questions in on Zoom for Midtown Scholar. That is the 29th at, I think, 8 o'clock. Just go to this post on RaisedRickySanchez.com, register for it, and you can get your question in early. And Thursday in the newsletter, the playoff shirt will be available. The tie-dye playoff shirt, the Hostage Orlando playoff shirt. And there's a code in the newsletter for 10% off in the merch store. And, Mike, final thing, in the merch store, all the shit that we're never going to make again is all on sale. Like some of the shirts are $10, some are $13. There's a few autographed Mike Scott posters left. So
sign up for the newsletter, RightsRickySanchez.com/newsletter. Alonzo Jones, the man.
Alonzo Jones, the Corner 3 newsletter. And that's it. Without any further ado, Chuck Klosterman, Amos, and the chef.
Laddie, sweetie, the man is here. Say the name. I say the name. I say the name. We were right, y'all. We were right. Even when it went wrong, we were right. We was right, y'all. We were right. So say the name. Say the name. We were right, y'all. We were right. Even when it went wrong, we were right. We were right, y'all. We were right. So say the name. Say the name. Say the name.
Drinking High Life,
Let's go.
Yeah.
All right. I want to get in on that.
Yeah. High Life champagne and beers. When I moved back to Philadelphia from Chicago, how many years ago? Maybe around 10 years ago. It was the first time I started drinking High Life, and it was wonderful. It actually is a great deal.
The thing is, it's a very drinkable beer.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think it's not like an IPA or something where there's a lot of alcohol in it or whatever, but it does, it's actually refreshing. So a lot of beer's not refreshing.
They're not.
And if I'm talking, I want to be refreshed as I go.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a combination of it's not just piss, right? It's not just watered down piss.
No.
It tastes like beer,
Yeah.
but it's beer in a satisfying way it doesn't require much energy.
Yeah.
That's true. You can drink a lot over the span of a day.
Mm-hmm.
So, so just to talk about what we were just talking about and why you're here, the Raised in Captivity out on paperback, and you are doing an event with me for the Midtown Scholar bookstore in Harrisburg.
Yeah, what kind of store? What's that store like?
So it's in Harrisburg, which is an hour and a half away from here. So I don't know. I've never been there. But what's cool about it is that it's an independent bookstore, right? So having been, when I went to Portland last summer and I went to Powell's, it gave me like, and I'm not a book guy. Truth be told, the only books I read are yours. And that's an actual true thing. I have a whole bookshelf of books, but I can't get through them. Yours are. So,
that's kind of a compliment, I guess, but okay.
Well, that makes you stand out in like a non-book way.
Yeah.
Like something about your reading does not feel like books to Spike.
Yes.
And might have you re-examine the kind of writer you are.
Yeah.
Well, it is an interesting thing. I was talking about this on, I guess, another one of these I did last week. You know, there are many, many writers who are much more successful than me, much more famous, greater influence, all of those things. And yet I seem to often get mentioned in TV shows. Like a character in the OC, he was reading my book, a show I didn't watch, but I quickly found out how many of my friends did.
Sure.
Like there was an episode of Veronica Mars where this happened. There was an episode of You're the Worst where that happened, which was because I was actually watching that, and then I had to pretend like I wasn't surprised when it happened, you know, because you're in a room with other people. And then it happened again on this show Billions. So it does seem like my books appeal to people who mostly watch television.
I think there has to be something about like, because I'm a TV writer and you write like.
Oh, you are?
I am. You don't want to write like, well, here's the obvious name. No one's writing Dan Brown unless Dan Brown is the joke, right? Unless Dan Brown is here's a joke about someone reading.
Sure.
It is a character trait for someone to be reading a Dan Brown book in 2020. But you could feel like a character has like off the beaten path, a little like cool but not so underground that you don't know it.
Yeah.
Like you're that connector between like unknown and like too famous. And I think
kind
right
of the
Helvetica of novel. I think
that's why Helvetica is the like basically the font I use for the cover of.
If you want to go by Chuck Helvetica, you could. I think that's a good pivot for you.
Sort of the mainstreaming of fake counterculture. That is what I'm doing.
Well,
here's why I was interested in the store though. I love the name of the store.
Midtown.
It's called the Midtown Scholar. So it's like a scholar, but you're not uptown, you're not downtown. You're in the middle of the town.
Right.
So, like, you probably have a legitimate job.
So, to celebrate the paperback release of Raised in Captivity, two things. I am doing a video chat with you on the 29th at, I think, 8 o'clock. The information's on this website and on Twitter. And people can submit Q&As, and they can right now. And if you order Raised in Captivity now at the Midtown Scholar website, and use the promo code RTRS at checkout, they'll give you free shipping, and they're giving another Chuck Klosterman book. They'll just include a bonus one for anyone who orders it. So thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
I appreciate being on.
It's funny you were talking about who reads you, because I have my therapist appointment on Wednesday nights, and I had to move it up 15 minutes so we could do this on time. And she said, "Who is your interview with?" And I said, "It's Chuck Klosterman. He's my favorite writer." And she said, "Oh, my husband has a bunch of his books." And I said, "I've never met a woman who is a Chuck Klosterman fan." I was like, it sort of reminds me of like I used to say about Primus. I knew lots of men who were Primus fans, but I didn't know any women. Do you find that your readership is split like more male to a?
Well, I'll tell you. I'll give you the honest answer. Initially, like when Fargo Rock City came out,
right,
I would go to a book reading, and not only was it a mostly male audience, it was an audience of usually 15 people who were exactly like me. I mean, exactly like my age. Liked the same things, looked like me. It was like, but then when Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs came out, that was different. By the time that came out and Killing Yourself to Live was, again, like when I would tour for Killing Yourself to Live, I would say half the audience was female.
Wow.
But as the years have progressed, it has moved sort of I think, more male again. Now, I think that partially might be because there's a lot of reasons, I guess. I do write about sports sometimes, although there are a lot of women who like sports, and a lot of the musical artists that I write about tend to be classic rock people, which does seem to have sort of a male gravitational pull. But I mean, the main thing that I've realized is that what happens is you start as a writer, and the main kind of person who is attracted to you is someone who sees themselves in your work. Mm-hmm. And then it expands and it becomes a very kind of different thing. And there was one point, probably right after Killing Yourself to Live in that area, where there were people who would come to say a book reading of mine who I don't even think that they gave a shit who I was or had read my books. They just like, I heard about this guy on the internet or something. They just kind of showed up. You're suddenly kind of you're working with people who are more interested just in the idea of the person and not even the writing. And then it kind of goes back down. And I'm kind of on the other side of that hill now. Like I am every book I write, it seems to be, like like the amount of notoriety that goes with it is less. So I assume by the end, like when I'm kind of writing my final books, it'll be like the beginning, except the people who will be exactly like me will be very old men. Mm-hmm. Like, that's like what it'll be, like a bunch of like elderly people. So I don't, it's a thing to know though. Even to you, I'm only using the example of who comes to the actual events, which are the most kind of dedicated literary people. I don't know who buys my books. There's no tracking on them. I don't know, So I try kind of not to think about it. I mean, like, you just, it seems like you're being real, like, I don't know, robotic or whatever, but you almost just have to look at it like purely as a number. Like, these are the people buying it. This is the number of people who bought it this week. You can't figure out who it is. Like, even if I knew, well, that wouldn't change anything. I mean, like, you can't anticipate what people want because people don't know until they get it. I mean, all you can do is just kind of write what you find to be interesting to yourself and hope somebody else cares.
This is your 11th book, right? 11?
Yep.
So does writing your 11th have like diminishing returns as far as career achievement for you, as far as like self-evaluation? Like, I think about this with musicians as well. Like, if Weezer puts out their, 20th album, I genuinely have no idea. Is it just like, this is what I do now? Or is every book release you feeling like you climbed like a different and unique Mount Everest?
Well, at the beginning, the book itself, publishing the book, is the whole thing. Okay, the idea of it being consumed by other people or reviewed is just a completely secondary thing. It's like I've worked my whole life to get in this position. That's definitely true with the first book. Usually the second book too. I would say for me, even to the third book. Then you do get to a point where it's like, well, this is my job now. Mm-hmm. This is just sort of what I do. It's no longer exciting to have a book published the way it was at the beginning. But then you move through another stage, which I think for me has kind of probably been the last 3 books, where you start separating your feelings from the external response to the book. And you start doing things again just for yourself in a way. I mean, like, certainly Raised in Captivity, it's a bunch of, 34, short stories. My publisher, my agent, all the people around me would be like, write a nonfiction book about some concept. I mean, those obviously sell better, but I am interested in sort of pursuing the things that are kind of interesting to me now. So it's the thing you're talking about is real, though. There is a middle phase where it just kind of feels like, well, I could have been anything. I could have been a coal miner and I'd be looking for lignite, but I did this instead. I mean, obviously it's much easier to write than mine coal, but there's some truth in that. It feels mechanical at some point. But it doesn't seem that way now. And that has to do also with aging. I was also, probably fortunate that my first book came out when I was 28. I think that if I had been 22 or 45, it would have been a much different thing.
The Raised to Ricky Sanchez podcast is presented by, as Chuck Klosterman sits and very quiet as we talk about our presenting sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook. Mike, baseball is back.
Mm-hmm.
We play on Friday. Season starts on Thursday officially, opening day. Opening day in late July, just like it always has been.
Yep. Nothing abnormal whatsoever.
Nope. There is no better place to bet on baseball than America's top-rated sportsbook app. That is DraftKings Sportsbook, and they have a free special. That's right, or a special. Free bets for every home run your team hits. So here's what you do. You place a pregame bet of at least $25 on your home team, on any team that you want. And for every home run they hit in that game, you get $5 worth of free bets. Additionally, DraftKings is offering all new users a sign-up bonus up to $1,000.
Wow.
Yeah, just use promo code RTRS. I was looking at Phil's odds are actually shorter than I thought they would be. I don't know if we went over this before. So to win to win it all. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the other thing. To win it all, what do you think Philly is?
To win it all.
Yeah.
I love it all.
Well,
I would guess 25 to 1.
22 to 1. Mm-hmm. Sixers are 28 to 1. Just
interesting.
Yeah. They're eighth. Phils are plus 1,100 to win the National League, and they are plus, I think, 325 to win the East. So there you go. Little futures bets for you there. Little futures bets.
Love that.
But if you don't like baseball, that's fine. You can bet on ping pong. You can bet on basketball. And the DraftKings Sportsbook, you hear a lot of ads for these online sportsbooks. DraftKings Sportsbook right here in the U.S., which means it is safe, it is secure, it's reliable. You make a deposit whenever you want. You make a withdrawal whenever you want. You have your system for blackjack like me, which is foolproof. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use promo code RTRS when you sign up. For a limited time, all new users can get a sign-up bonus up to $1,000. That is code RTRS to get your sign-up bonus up to $1,000. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. Pennsylvania only. Oh, by the way, our free Orlando playoff hostage pool, you can still bet up until the first game, the first NBA game. It is free to play. You can win $500, all over-unders. To get into that, just go to our website, RightsToRickySanchez.com. Rest of the disclaimer. In partnership with Meadows Racetrack and Casino, bonus comprised of first deposit bonus and a first bet match, each up to $500. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough. Damn it. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Not a great one that time. Back to the pod. Yeah. So I read Raised in Captivity when it came out, and then to do this, I wanted to refresh myself, but I'm bad at reading. So I was like, you know what? I'll listen to it. And I listened to it, and I'm curious what I've always felt like I hear your voice when I read it. And maybe that's because I've heard you on podcasts before and I know what you sound like, but I've always felt like you write in your voice. How do you feel about the people consuming your book via audio as opposed to written word?
Well, and I've talked about this before. To some degree, I think I have made a mistake by going on so many podcasts and by going on television and like doing stuff for the NFL Network and stuff. And the reason I say that is because at the beginning of my writing career, people would say like, oh, this writing has a lot of voice. But if they don't know what the person sounds like, if they've never heard the person speak before, they use the best version of their own voice. Mm-hmm. So if somebody likes the writing, likes the voice of a writer, what they're really doing is almost becoming that writer in a way and consuming themselves. But now lots of people have heard my voice. I mean, if I do a podcast for Bill Simmons, it gets about as much attention as every book I've written combined. So there is a real understanding of what I sound like. People don't like my voice. They find it fucking irritating. They think it's nasally and it's not what they want or it's not what they expected. And as a consequence, they hear me in the writing in a way that probably has, to some degree, changed the experience. The upside of this is, of course, by doing that, it probably has made the books more popular. But in terms of like the audio version of this book, it is a strange deal because the people who read the stories, like I read about half and like other people read the other half. You know, I love that they did it. Most of those people I picked personally to do it. But then when I actually listen to it, I'm inevitably like, they got that wrong. That's not how it's supposed to be. Like that's like you know, it's a real kind of subtle thing. But of course, I notice it. The audiobook for Killing Yourself to Live, for example, is awful. It's some soap opera actor who perceived me totally different than I am. Like he kind of saw me as a very angry person and reads the book in a real angry way. But like the novels, like Downtown Owl and The Visible Man, the people who read those books just did an amazing job, especially The Visible Man. I mean, I think the audio version of The Visible Man is like I almost prefer it. I mean, if I don't go back and read my old work, but if I did, I would go back and listen to it before I would read it.
I'm so glad that you said that, because we did a whole thing for charity where one of my scripts was released to listeners, and Spike was like, "We should just do a table read," and I was like, "I will shoot myself in the face if we do a table read with like random actors or, you know, our friends on the podcast." And they would read stuff.
What show do you write for? How do I not know this?
The show hasn't come out yet. It's a Dwayne Johnson show on NBC that's coming out where comes out.
Okay. Because I listened to the podcast you guys did with Greenwald, and you talked a lot about TV writing and stuff. I don't remember if you talked about your own experience as a writer or you just made jokes about it.
Might have been just jokes, probably.
Yeah.
Not a lot of insight there, just more self-deprecating. But I read the book and I really loved it, and I've read a number of your books, and I thought this was especially excellent. And I didn't hear your voice in it at all. I heard the voice of the author. I didn't hear your voice specifically, your audio voice. So I could still read it and feel like it was. There's a difference. I think when I write, I think it's very clear that this is my voice. I do a podcast 18 times a week with this guy. And I write almost like from a manic level of how I talk. But you, in your writing, you take, especially in this book, you take an unusual thing, sometimes it's more insane, sometimes it's just like a little odd, and you logic it like as far as it can go. You take it to the nth degree as far as like where would the logical end go for this? Is that something that you do consciously, where you think of the weird thing and then go from there, or is that just how your brain works and you just sort of like it ends up there in some way?
Well, I don't know. I know this. Like I know that I do it backwards compared to how you're supposed to do it if you go to a creative writing program. If you go to a creative writing program, they always say the same thing about writing fiction. They say that you start with character and plot, and ideas and themes come out of that. And you should never think to yourself about what the idea or the theme is going to be. You should just have it come through the characters as organically as possible. I do work completely opposite. Like I start with the idea, and then I start with kind of the premise, and then I put characters and the mechanics of the plot inside of it. The reason that I appreciate you saying that about like stringing out to the logical end. I don't know if that's necessarily makes for like a traditional way to write short stories, but I try to write fiction the exact same way I write nonfiction because I prefer reading nonfiction. Like I prefer the experience of reading nonfiction to fiction, but I'm compelled to sometimes write untrue stories. That is like so if I were writing a nonfiction piece, of course you would take the logic to the end. You would follow the string until the string got, frayed. So I probably do that. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm pretty untrained at this. Like I have an undergraduate degree in journalism That's it. Like I don't. It's like I guess it's autodidactic the way I did it, because that's just growing up in North Dakota. I did not know a writer. Like it's not that I didn't know many, or they were there and I didn't know. There were just none. There were none. And when I moved to Akron, Ohio to work at that newspaper, I met a few people there. Terry Pluto was there. And there were a few other people who had written books. So there was like, well, I guess this is something you could do. And then I eventually moved to New York, and now it seems like literally half the people I know there have written books. So it's strange. Now I'm back in Portland, and it's weird again to be a writer. Like, people are surprised if I meet them and they find out what I do. They're surprised that I'm able to make a living doing it.
It's funny you mentioned I prefer I always have trouble with fiction because I feel like 10 pages in, I don't know who anyone is. And when I read nonfiction, I feel like I have some sort of background as to who I'm reading about. And that's why I guess I sort of hear your voice in the fiction, because I feel like I can follow along, I guess.
It's possible. I mean, what you're saying is just it's a real practical thing, because it's like, it's the reason I prefer, if I know nothing else about a movie, if someone says, well, there's a documentary and there's a fictional feature and I don't know anything else about it, I'm always going to watch the documentary, simply because even if it's bad, I might learn something. Like, even if it's dull and not that interesting and poorly done, like, I might learn like the history of of winter wheat harvest in Kansas in the 50s or something. I'll learn something, and that's the same with nonfiction. Like, a bad nonfiction book can still be useful. Many textbooks are very boring to read, and yet I like reading reference books. So it makes sense that I would like reading nonfiction.
I don't want to ask you too many questions about the book, because I want to save stuff for the Midtown Scholar thing, but there were a couple of stories that I had on my list that I felt like would work to talk about on this podcast. So the first one is Execute Again. Now, Execute Again, if you're listening and haven't read the book, is basically, and hopefully I do this right, is about a high school football coach who is not a normal coach, not really even a football guy, and basically teaches this is in a very basic sense, teaches the team this one play, and if they execute it perfectly, this play will get them 2.7 yards each time, and they will be unbeatable, this team. Maybe it's because I know that you love college sports, but when I read this, all I could think about was Chip Kelly. And I wondered if you thought about Chip Kelly when you wrote about Execute Again.
Well, okay, first of all, that's interesting, because I thought you were leading up to say what other people have asked is that Mike Leach? Because Mike Leach is a lawyer. He didn't play college football and all those things. Chip Kelly is not far off, though. In terms of who I was actually thinking of, it's set in a high school scenario, so it's more the idea of if you had an experience with someone who was insane, but what they taught you was incredibly effective, and you were a young person, how would that then transfer to the rest of your life? But the idea starts with, like, I don't know. This is the fact of the matter. Sometimes I just sit on my balcony and smoke pot and think about sports. I do that a lot. Okay. And I love to imagine the idea of an incredibly kind of confusing, almost like single wing 1940-ish football play that is, it's never a breakaway play. It's just like this thing that has all these moving parts to get you like these 2.7 yards, but it always gets exactly that. I am kind of fascinated by the meaning of repetition. That, like, the idea of repetitive acts and what does it mean to do the exact same act over and over again. I mean, I just I like thinking about things like free throw shooting and stuff, and like just the idea that there's just like these that what is sort of the philosophical meaning behind doing the exact same thing over and over again. Partially also because, you know, I came from a farm where I was watching my parents and my brothers and stuff seemingly do the exact same things every day, and not really ever questioning what that meant. Like, what is it? Or like somebody who works in a factory for 40 years does the exact same thing for 40 years and doesn't really stop to wonder if this is some reflection. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to me. So, like, I mean, a little. I guess your Chip Kelly thing is not totally off, but at the same time, I wasn't thinking about it directly.
That idea of doing the same thing every day is also, and pardon me, I forget the story name, but that's also represented in the Quarters short story. The flipping quarters. Yeah. Oh. Do you feel like that was just like constantly going through your head of some people, because writing is inherently such, you are doing the same thing every day where, you know, you're sitting at a computer and like just like beating your head against it, but you are like coming up with new stuff rather than like task same every day.
Yeah, I mean the story about the people flipping coins was in one of my earliest books, in Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs. There's this joke about how everything in life is 50-50. Like even rolling a dice is 50-50 or whatever, you know. And it's, of course, I was being funny. I was, you know, but that is maddening to mathematicians and statisticians and so many. Like, I have been asked in very adversarial, confrontational ways about that so many times in my life, and it's even sort of been used by some people as like, this is almost like an example of like kind of the anti-science, like Trumpian philosophy. It's just real interesting to me. So I've always thought about how impacted people were by this idea of everything being 50-50. And that sort of led me to wonder, well, what would happen to the world if something that actually was 50-50 wasn't? Like if that suddenly changed.
I'll tell you, it's not just mathematicians that pisses off, because as somebody who has said like, it's 50-50 chance, either it'll happen or it won't, it makes regular people mad too.
Well, because they can't ever, some people just, there's a certain kind of humor that some people find not just unfunny, but they almost absorb it as a criticism of their value system. You know, if somebody really thinks of themselves as a rationalist, like their life is driven by rationality, the idea of saying, well, one thing's going to happen or it's not, don't worry about it, that seems to remove everything that they've ever spent their life trying to create. So it's you know, it's weird to write a story, but you know, almost specifically to annoy a certain kind of person, but sometimes that happens. You know?
And the other one that I felt like I needed to ask about was Blizzard of Summer was my favorite one. And as somebody who worked in rock radio for like 15 years and worked with local bands, I felt like I saw this band. So in this story, basically this middling band ends up with this song that ends up being a hit with white supremacists, even though the song has no tangible like inkling of white supremacy. None of the people in the band are white supremacists. It was the only story, and I like ambiguous endings to movies. It was the only story where I wanted to know what happened after the story was over. I wonder if you had thought about, like, at any point after you finished it, what happened? Because
you know, I don't have an answer for that. Okay. Do you guys remember a story that you probably read in 7th or 8th grade called The Lady or the Tiger? Do you remember that?
I don't.
Okay. It's a really common story to be like in a textbook for a 7th grade English student or an 8th grade English student. The idea of the story is that there's a king and he's kind of a fucking lunatic, and he has all these weird ideas about how they should figure out if a criminal is guilty or innocent. And the way he does it is he has like a stadium with 2 doors in it. And behind one door is a beautiful woman, and behind the other door is a tiger. And the guy gets put out in the ring, and he has to just pick a door. And if he picks the door with the woman, he gets to marry her and live his life. And if he picks the door with the tiger eats him. Well, in the story, the king is in love with this guy, and the king doesn't like the guy. So he basically, essentially frames him for a crime, I guess, or the crime is dating my daughter. And he puts him in this ring. So there's one door with a lady and one door with the tiger. And the daughter figures out what is behind each door. And the woman is actually her rival. It's somebody she hates. And then the other door is the tiger. So she loves this guy. And if she points to the door with the woman, kind of signals that way, he will open it and live his life with her enemy. Of course, if he opens the other door, the tiger will eat him. So she points to a door and he opens it. And the story ends. Okay, that's the end of that story. We don't know what happens. So basically the question is, who did he get, the lady or the tiger? Now, there's a lot of people who hate that story. And they hate it because they were like, what a cop-out by the writer. He doesn't say what happened. But in truth, every ending happens by him not saying what happens. You can imagine every possibility, right, or the meaning of either one. And that story, I think in a lot of ways, has influenced my entire career, reading that story. I mean, I don't think I've ever stopped thinking about it. And I don't think I've ever read a story I like more. So when you say what happens to this band, well, every possibility you imagine happened. Because the only part of the story that's sort of limited by reality is what's on the page, like the reality I created. Everything else, the way the song sounds. Like in that story, the song is described. You can probably imagine what it might sound like. It's supposed to be like a little bit like of a kind of a cross between like Celebrity Skin by Hole and the Sesame Street theme. Like you can kind of imagine what that might sound like, but you can't exactly imagine it. Whatever way you do is your own. It's a subjective thing.
The Rice to Ricky Sanchez podcast is proudly brought to you by the best pet food on the entire planet Earth, maybe even Mars, Jupiter, Pluto. That is By Nature, slow-cooked superfood pet food. Made with Super Fusion, Mike. Super Fusion.
I have some big By Nature news.
Oh, really?
Donovan, loyal customer now.
Oh, Good Boy Club?
Good Boy Club.
Oh, have them get me a picture of Donovan with the bag. We got to induct into I think that's the 6th official member of the Good Boy Club. Wow.
I'll text it to you during this ad.
Yeah, that's great. So the great things about, this is not bullshit, man. The great things about By Nature, great ingredients, premium ingredients, apple cider vinegar, spinach, blueberries, ginger and coconut oil, premium proteins, and the first, you go look at the ingredients on By Nature, the first ingredient is the protein, which is huge. It's the animal protein and premium ones. And here's the thing that they do that nobody else does. It is slow cooked, which promotes immune system support, skin and coat support, heart and brain health, hip and joint health, all that stuff, because animals process food much quicker than humans do. Cooking it slower keeps the nutrients in it, which means the dog or the cat is going to get all the nutrients. You don't have to worry about buying the right size. There's not small dog food and big dog food. It is suitable for all dogs of all ages and sizes, same as cats. It's top of the line. And when you get your By Nature, make sure you send me a picture of your boy or girl with the food so we can induct them into the Good Boy Club.
You should have it now.
Let me look.
He's
there it is.
Mid-eating.
There it is. That's if you're watching on YouTube. There you go. I'll put the picture up on YouTube. There you go.
He's diving in I love voraciously.
It. Yep. And who wouldn't? I ate it voraciously on the pie.
No, you didn't actually. You ate it pretty timidly one at a time.
It's a fair point. We have a deal for you. Go to Chewy. Search By Nature, use promo code RTRS20. You'll get 20% off your first purchase of By Nature. If you didn't remember that, just go to bynaturepetfoods.com, click on the Chewy logo. Again, promo code RTRS20 for 20% off. By Nature Pet Foods. We love it. Back to the Ricky.
You also, in that story, I wrote this down, you wrote, the band manager says, we can't discount the taste of dumb people, which is the line that I liked. Do you believe that?
Well, it's a kind of a question about anything that's commercial, right? Like if you want something to be commercially successful, you can't be like, if you're writing a television show, for example, you can't be like, I want this show to be huge. I want every smart person in the world to like it, but that's it. It'll be, that's not how it works. I was also, that story has a lot to do with something I read about the Beatles. It's even kind of mentioned in the story. Like there's the best Beatles book. There's many great Beatles books, but one is called Revolutions in the Head, which is a guy who basically breaks down every single Beatles song. And he mentions how there is a Beatles song where there was actually kind of a period in the band's life where they sort of enjoyed confusing people. Like one time John Lennon sings a lyric wrong and they're thinking, should we go in and fix this? And he's like, oh no, the pseuds will love it. Meaning the pseudo-intellectuals love trying to figure out what I really meant by saying this line wrong. It's funny that people are going to misinterpret that. But then the writer's like, this is also why like Charles Manson can kill people after listening to the White Album. Like once you say that anybody can listen to this and any interpretation is valid, you're kind of opening the door to very dangerous misinterpretations. Now, the question is then, is the risk worth it? Do we have to give artists the ability to write consciously confusing messages? I would say yes. I would feel like the country as a whole is saying no. I feel like that's something that was popular in the 60s and 70s, maybe even up through the early part of the 90s. But I don't think it's that way anymore. I think now people want real clarity of motive and clarity of intent.
I agree with that. And when you're writing this, is kind of a similar question, but I think different. How do you weigh an audience's intelligence in considering how much to explain the point you're trying to make?
That matters more in nonfiction because when you're writing nonfiction, you have to work from the perspective that I'm either writing this for a silo of people, basically people who fully understand the subject and just want to think about the meaning of it, or you're writing for a pretty wide swath of people, some of which are actually being introduced to it. And then you got to kind of weigh the complexity of giving a lot of expository information along with complicated ideas. In fiction, you can't do that. Like at least I can't. Like the closest that I guess I would come to that is in some ways, I think you're always writing a book for a version of yourself 3 years ago. Because during the 3 years that, okay, I'm 48 now. So if I'm writing a book now, it's really for the version of me at the age of 45. And during 46, 47, those years, that's where I was learning sort of what to write about, how to sort of explain it. By the time I'm 48, I can't write anything that's going to surprise me. Like I can't write something and read it for the first time and be like, wow, like I got to know it already. But maybe an earlier version of me didn't. I don't know. It's a hard thing. Like this podcast, for example, like if I were to ask you guys what degree you think about your audience, I think, I don't know, what do you imagine about your audience?
I would say, like we've done a lot of live events, so we've met a lot of our audience, and like a lot of this that was built on social media, so we have interactions with them. And I would say to a large degree, because we have not done it in a typical sports podcast kind of way, because we've done it the way that we like to do it, almost our audience has been cultivated to be people who enjoy the things that we enjoy the way that we enjoy them to a certain degree. So I think our audience gets what we do because if they didn't, they wouldn't be here anymore. Like we've repeatedly sort of been different about how we've done it in a way that would almost force a casual fan into hating it.
Well, it's true. Podcasting is interesting in that way. Like it is very different than if you were doing this on radio. It is a different thing. And I mean, books maybe even more so because you got to pay for them. I mean, that's like, if somebody pays to buy the soft cover of this book, if somebody's like, okay, I heard this podcast, I'm going to buy this now. Like, they've made a monetary investment, but also kind of an intellectual investment. It's something that they want. Okay. But when I would write stuff for Grantland or whatever, or when I would write for any site that was put online, the majority of people consuming it were just consuming it because something else led them there. Like they had no relation. They were actually psychologically closed to it very often. Like, convince me this is real. Convince me this is good. But when you, with a podcast, particularly like this one now, like we're half hour into it or whatever, if someone didn't like this, they've stopped. The only people still listening to it are people who are sort of interested in it. And as a consequence, like, they're going to be open to things that someone on the radio who just is flipping around like on Sirius XM or whatever comes across it. I find that, like, okay, when I'm in my car and say I listen to like the talk shows on ESPN radio or whatever, I find myself much more critical of the ideas that those people express than any podcast that I listen to by choice.
So my day job is I manage the sports radio station in Philadelphia. So I'm like sort of aware of both, and planning for people who are just happening into what you're saying. Your arguments have to be clear, and you have to continually repeat them because people are in every 8 to 10 minutes, and it just doesn't allow. It's just not the same thing, like it's both talking, they're both talking about sports, but they're very different in their execution. And I would imagine somebody who regularly consumes podcasts would listen to sports radio and be like this is dumb. Or somebody who only listens to sports radio would turn on a podcast and be like, okay, get to the sport. Like, we're 37 minutes into the podcast and we haven't talked about the Sixers one time. And it's a Sixers podcast, and they're accepting of that. So it's very, very different.
Well, plus, if this was a 37-minute radio interview, I probably would have mentioned my book 6 times. Or between us. I mean, we would have been like, that's why we're doing it, right? So you'd have been like, oh, we're talking to Chuck Klosterman here. He's, Raised in Captivity. It's like, that is always the part that makes doing live radio frustrating in a way. I mean, because it's just, it seems like you're always doing your own commercial. Whereas it doesn't feel like I'm doing a commercial now. Like, I don't feel like it doesn't even feel like promotion. It feels like I could be on your podcast for no reason whatsoever. That could have happened, Yeah.
I guess the question for me is, like, each story has a message, right? Or at least something you want the reader to think about on a deeper level. And in terms of, like, the audience's intelligence, would it bum you out to know that, say, 40% of your audience is not getting the story on the level you are intending them to get? They're not even thinking about the deep question that you're going for. They're not even getting there. And if you laid out, like,
I would. My answer is no, because I'm certain that happens. Like 40%. It's to get specifically what I'm trying to get across. I mean, I don't know. I feel pretty confident in saying there are probably some stories in this book that no one has gotten the idea I was really
and you have to make
going
for.
I mean, because like you can't be too obvious. Like, you don't want to hit people over there with a hammer and say, like, this is the idea. It's like it's got to be subtle, and it's got to be. You got to allow people to interpret things through the prism of their own life. Like it can't. It's not like nonfiction writing is sometimes a bit like bowling. I've always felt this, in that when you're bowling, you can be perfect. Somebody who bowls for the first time can have a frame or two where they're perfect. In journalism, you can be perfect if, like, everything in the story is accurate, and the idea you're trying to get across is the idea of the story, and it's structured in the right way, and it's fair, and all of these things. You've basically written a perfect story. Fiction is not like that. Like there's no way anything like the Lady and the Tiger story I mentioned. That's not a perfect story. Many different people could read that and have a completely different experience. So the idea that people aren't exactly getting what I think, I don't know. It's right. I'm happy to be reading this book. Actually, Chris Ryan told me to read this book called Walter Benjamin and the Dairy Queen. It's the Larry McMurtry book from 1999, where it's kind of a memoir. And he's talking about, throughout the book, this critic, Walter Benjamin. And Mike, sort of a towering figure in the world of criticism. And the thing is, like, Walter Benjamin's idea of a short story was that it should almost be like a piece of pottery. Like, it's just this thing. It's just there. It looks the way it looks. It feels the way it looks. You get no sense that there is a secondary meaning. Any meaning has to be created by the person using or looking at the pot or the piece of pottery, however you look at it. I never had thought of this idea with that language in my fucking life, but I guess I agree with it. Like, I write these stories in this book, and they are not unsuccessful to me if somebody's takeaway is completely wrong, or if their takeaway is nothing. Like, if their takeaway is like, I don't get it. That's not like, they didn't get it. That's okay.
It's similar to
That's fine. I want them to feel as though that the time that they invested reading it was entertaining and enjoyable, but they don't have to, like, it's not a math problem.
Like music's the same way, right? I mean, I would say that many times that the writer has an idea of what the song means, and there are 1,000 different interpretations of what it means, but as long as you liked it, I think there's a win there. Right?
Although people, I mean, it's a complicated thing. The Nirvana song "In Bloom" basically is about Kurt Cobain looking at his audience, being like, "I hate the guys who like this music now." Like, which is interesting too, because the previous record had sold, like, at the time, like 35,000 copies. So, like, he was anticipating that Nevermind would be huge and was correct, and then realized he would dislike the kind of people who liked it. Like, one of my favorite kind of categories of music are when people write songs describing the experience of something that has yet to happen. Like the Boston song, Rock and Roll Band or whatever. It's like they're talking about, like, getting successful, but, like, the band hasn't started yet when he writes the song. So it's like, it's like, a lot of hip hop songs are like that, where they talk about sort of how fame affects them before they have ever been famous. I love that.
Kid Rock's Only God Knows Why was written before he was famous, is about like all of that. And Bon Jovi, Wanted Dead or Alive, is like pretty close to that. They had been on tour before that.
Yeah, they were not a huge touring enterprise at that point. I mean, they had toured,
You mentioned Chris and Andy, and you've mentioned Bill, and you mentioned Grantland. I'm wondering, and maybe you've talked about this, but I haven't heard it. What do you think about when you think of Grantland? Like, what is your memory of it?
Well,
and the legacy of it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seemed to have worked in the capacity that it did. Like, it was a short window of time. I was probably too old when it started, to be honest. Like, I mean, like, I my career was going in a different direction at that time. Like, I was almost trying to get away from the idea of everything I did somehow being measured against its response or whatever, So, like, I was there at the beginning, and then it just, the experience changed for me. Like, it was a good experience. Some things were not so great. It was weird to have a lot of my friends move to Los Angeles when I was still in New York, because they got these jobs there, and I'd be like, you should start working there, and then they all moved out there. But I guess I have mixed feelings about it, probably. I guess that would be safe to say I have mixed feelings, but that's a product of me. It's not like it wasn't in any way a bad situation. It was just I was changing as a person.
I wonder what it's like for you to see, like, there's been a lot of like Bill in the news and like people talking about how he is and what he's like and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder, as somebody who has known him and worked with him, not the truth but just what it's like to see from afar that happen.
Well, I kind of feel bad for him. I mean, like the story in the New York Times was unfair. It was an unfair story. Like the guy but it's like it's a weird time. And it was interesting because initially it just seemed like Bill had the greatest timing in the world selling to Spotify right before the coronavirus hit. It just seemed like, but then because the other part of culture changed, then suddenly, he was in this environment where there's just a huge amount of animosity between the young labor force and a boss who's now like, a very wealthy person. So, it's so complicated for them. I feel bad for him. I mean, I do. I mean, it's like, it's just, granted he's got like a great life and everything, but it would be really stressful to be involved in that situation. Yeah.
I'm always interested in, this is somewhat related to that. The idea of separating, whether you can separate the art from the artist. I think it's just an interesting conversation. I've probably bored a lot of people by discussing it with them or wondering what they thought. And you wrote an article years ago about boycotting Woody Allen's films in the New York Times. And I always think about it like in terms of, primarily separating art from the artist applies to writers, directors, musicians, right? When we think about that, legitimately artists. But I always wonder, like, well, what about athletes? And what is it about athletes or even other people in the crew of, like, would you boycott Lady Bird if the production designer did what Woody Allen did? Or like an athlete, well, because an athlete doesn't put their thoughts and fears and anxieties into running a route on as a wide receiver, is that any different than, say, Woody Allen putting his subconscious or whatever into a film?
Well, I mean, to me, that's the biggest thing that has changed about criticism in the, whatever number of years, 30 almost years now I've done this, which is when I got into criticism, the idea of being able to separate art from the artist was the main thing you were supposed to do. The idea when I got into this was that most people can't do this. Most people can't listen to a record without thinking about what they think about the individual making it. Most people can't read a book without having an idea of what the author must be like. And as a critic, you're supposed to be able to separate those things and look at the book or look at the movie or look at the record and actually have an experience with the artifice. And like I am listening to this Marilyn Manson record and I'm not thinking about Marilyn Manson's public persona. I'm thinking about him as somebody who creates music. What value does it have? And now that has completely reversed. I mean, now not only are you not supposed to do that, people become very angry if you do. Like, if using like Woody Allen as an example, it is almost impossible to imagine somebody, say, writing a retrospective piece about crimes and misdemeanors and only talking about the movie. That'd
be insane.
Wouldn't happen, it's a difficult thing because when I was young, I was always sort of on the cusp of being unwilling to do that. Like I was always like, well, you sort of have to think about this person too. It's more interesting to inject your knowledge of the individual into the music or into the movie. But now it has gone so far the other way. I guess I'm perceived as a reactionary because now I feel like the idea of looking at something and only having a relationship to the thing you're looking at is so unpopular, is seen as so problematic that, to me, it is completely just, I don't know, it has really altered the relationship to art. Because, think about when you were a little kid. Like, think about when you were in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. The first records you liked, the first music you liked, the first TV shows you liked. In all likelihood, you had no knowledge of the person making it. Like, for me, it was just like when I heard Electric Avenue by Eddie Grant, it was just sound coming out of the radio. Like, I didn't know anything about his life. I didn't understand the meaning of the lyrics. I had to make up the meaning of the lyrics because I loved that song. And for most people, that is sort of the interplay that they have with these things. But now that's not the way it's supposed to be looked at. It'd be like, it would be if I made, it's kind of a few years old now, but I remember when the movie Get Out came out, it would be really weird to talk about this just as a horror movie. Like, if you're like, I'm not going to talk about its other dynamics, it's almost unthinkable now. But so, in terms of athletes, that's another thing that, like now, I don't know. It is strange how much what at one point was like pop culture seemed smaller at some point. It really encompassed everything. But when people talked about pop culture, they were talking about kind of the same things. And now there's kind of like our whole relationship with politics is through the kind of lens of popular culture, and our whole relationship with sports is. And like, you really noticed this during the virus, where there are no games, and yet the amount that people are talking about sports is the same.
We know it.
It's like, it's not, it doesn't make any sense when you think about it. It's a little weird, but that's, it's like, I think part of the reason like the NBA wants to get back into this bubble is, I mean, okay, the main reason is like the players are like, we're going to lose money if we don't do this. They're going to I think there was a period probably where the players were like, well, we can't be penalized this, can we? And then there was that force majeure clause in the contract or whatever. It's like, oh, we guess we can. So they're doing it. But I think from the NBA's perspective, they're almost like, the games might be that good. It won't necessarily dictate or indicate who the best team was. We're going to give someone a championship, and it's going to be weird, and there's going to be an asterisk, but these guys will be tweeting again. Like, there'll be stories about, Ben Simmons is hanging out with LeBron. He's like, well, are they going to? It's like these things will happen now. I think that the NBA and Adam Silver has realized something, which is that they can sustain a league even if interest in the actual games is not that great. Like, people are interested in these people in a soap opera way, and it's weird, but it's how the world is.
Well, I do wonder if that will catch up with them. I think the pressure to, like, I think the more and more that they draw people to those sorts of things, to the non-basketball things, and the less that they're able to keep them with the basketball, the more fleeting that connection is a little bit. Like, it just puts pressure for them to create dramatic things with actual lives, as opposed to, fake storylines, as opposed to writing stories. And I wonder if
But the thing they're doing though is easier, right? It's easier to extrapolate some kind of tweet exchange between JJ Redick and, Avery Bradley or something that is actually kind of meaningless. You can extrapolate that to mean something very profound. You can't take a bad basketball game and convince people that it was good. And, it's like the NBA as a product, as far as in my opinion, the on-court product is probably better now than it's ever been in my life, I think. And yet the second quarter, the third quarter can get dull. Like, it's basketball's a hard TV experience in some ways. Like, football is ideal for television. You could not design a sport that would be better to watch on TV than football. But basketball isn't like that. And the game has to be real sort of electrifying to keep your attention the whole way through. But there's really no ceiling to how interesting a rumor can be if you keep adding layers and layers of potential meaning to it. So it's actually safer. I know what you're saying. In some ways, I think your argument is that like they can live off this idea that people will be interested in these guys' personalities only as long as they still care about basketball, you know?
Otherwise they're not interested.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Baseball has none of that, right? Like baseball is not a dynamic sport. I like baseball a lot, but baseball is not a dynamic sport for television whatsoever. And it doesn't have even a percentage of the human interest story that it has with basketball, because whether it's baseball does a bad job of promoting the type of players that they have, or they just have inherently less interesting players. It just feels like they're just lacking.
It is odd. I mean, it is, you know, there were so many famous baseball players when I was growing up. 90s. And there are so few now. It doesn't make sense. I don't fully understand it. But it's almost impossible to be a casual baseball fan now. You know, that was with my memory. Like, I never cared about baseball the way I cared about football and basketball, but you'd kind of dip in and out, and there'd be someone, you know, who's going to win the Cy Young this year, and then the playoffs would happen, you know. And now it seems like if you don't follow baseball pretty closely from like the pitchers and catchers reporting, you're just not going to care the whole year. It's like it doesn't. You have to have some sort of local relationship to the team.
So in some ways, the best thing that could happen to baseball is the Astros getting caught in a cheating scandal, like a very loud, obvious cheating scandal where they're like, okay, they're the villains. This is what they were doing. It's easy to understand. It's like, let's see if they get redemption. They're watching to see if there's any like pitchers are going to throw at them or something. That's the juicy thing.
That was the most I read about baseball in 2 years when that happened.
And the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast is brought to you by the official realtor of The Process, Adam Kasabi. People ask me all the time, how do you spell Kasabi? And I say,
like
realty.
It sounds.
Yep. K-S-E-B-E, in case you want to look him up.
Normal spelling.
There's only good stuff about him on the internet. K-S-E-B-E. Look, so if you want to, first of all, he is your realtor, right? If you want to get a house anywhere, if it's time to buy, you're like, mortgage rates are low, the market's great, I want to buy a house. Even if it's not the Delaware beaches, call Kasabi. He will give you invaluable information, and he will hook you up to the realtor you need in your state, whether it's Jersey, PA, wherever you are. And mortgage rates, I'm telling you, now's the time. But if it's a Delaware beach house you want, man, oh man, he is definitely your guy. He's always sending me stuff. He sent me one. It was a fucking awesome 3-bedroom, 2-bath townhouse in Lewis Beach. It was beautiful for $365,000 and that's a shore house in Lewis Beach. The property tax is $1,000. The reasons to buy in Delaware are numerous. Super low property taxes. The crowds that are in Jersey, it's not overpriced with everybody on top of each other, and different shore points for different people. I mentioned I love Lewis. There's Bethany. There is Rehoboth. There is Dewey Beach. He's your guy, man. And I'm telling you, what you do is you buy one of these beach houses. That way you have a place for vacation during the summer every year. You rent it out the other times. It pays your mortgage, and you just generational wealth. You're one step away from generational wealth. I don't know if you can have generational wealth with one shore house, but it's definitely a great way to invest.
Sounds like
it. Yeah. And you're basically, when you're renting it out, you're not paying for it anyway. So 302-864-8643, 302-864-8643. That is the number for Adam. You can call him or text him, or just email adam@processrealtor.com. Join Adam Silver.
Hello?
Oh, no. You're here?
Well,
hey!
I was just checking in.
Oh, we were doing a commercial. We were just wrapping it up. Now it's done. Oh. So do you want to start?
Well, okay, I'm confused. Is this a live podcast? Or is this just a regular podcast?
Regular.
Just a regular podcast.
See, I thought there was some live event tied to this.
Oh, so it's two different things.
Okay.
So you're going to have to talk to me 2 times. Don't worry, I've split the questions up.
Okay.
So
this is just a podcast. I'm just doing the podcast.
Straight up.
And then the thing in Pennsylvania you're going to host.
Correct. Yeah.
Aha. So that makes more sense to me. I was like, how the hell are we going to do I'd never heard of a live podcast before. I did it's like it's kind of antithetical to the podcasting medium. But
that's right.
This is great. Well, because is this literally the first time we've spoken, or have we spoken? I know you know Chris. I know you know Andy. I know you know all those guys.
Yeah, we've spoken before. Wait, hold on one sec. I'm going to stop recording so we can go back into this. Hold on. So let me just say the name of our sponsor, Adam Kasabi, the official realtor of The Process. All right, back to the pod. When we had you on the podcast in 2016, I remember it was when What If We're Wrong was coming out. I remember sending you the email, and I invited you on a Sixers podcast, and your reaction was, does this mean I get to talk about Ben Simmons? You were like excited to talk about Ben Simmons. And I wonder here in 2020 what you look back and like what you think of him so far.
Well, now, okay, obviously you guys know this. Like, he's going to play the 4 now, apparently. And I see some people are saying that this is this proves that he has failed. I don't think so. I think that they're trying to put the 5 best guys that they have on the floor, and they have somebody now who's a real viable point guard who can't play anywhere else. It's almost like they're mad at Ben Simmons because he actually does make sense as a power forward in some ways. Although another part of me is like, well, now in the NBA, like the power forward is kind of the guy who shoots that corner 3, and he's not going to do that. I still think that what he sort of brings as a package makes him an elite player. I understand how there will always be this idea that if it's the 7th game of a playoff series and we're down to the last 4 minutes of the game, can you have him on the court? Because teams are going to demand that he shoot and they're going to foul him. And it's like, I guess I would take that risk, he's a great defender. I don't know. I'm still somebody who kind of looks at him, and I was like, I would want him on my team. I would not try to break up the Sixers with this idea that you could move him for, and surround Embiid with different guys. That seems wrong to me.
Can you think in the history of pro sports about a great, great, great player who is so obviously and oddly unwilling to do a normal thing in that sport or unable?
Well, I mean, people said that about Chamberlain. People said that about Shaq. It was just sort of like, if Shaq could shoot 68% from the free throw line, he would have been, he was unstoppable during points of his career anyways. But it was like, free throw shooting is a different thing. With Simmons, it's odd, though, because he's it's not just like LeBron's not a great free throw shooter. And yet you would not want to leave LeBron open from 22 feet for a key point in the game, but you would leave Simmons open for that. I sometimes wonder, it's like, does it have something to do with him being Australian?
Maybe.
Now that's not a criticism of the people of Australia. I'm just wondering if there could be something culturally about him that stops him from perhaps seeing what seems so obvious to other people. I saw something online today about I think it was like an NPR journalist who's in France right now and was talking to someone in France about the idea of wearing a mask during the virus is a political thing. And they were just completely baffled by this. Like they couldn't understand how it could be political. And she's like, we got to understand these things about America. I wonder if you're Ben Simmons and you're growing up in Australia and you're watching the NBA kind of removed, like you're seeing the games, but it's like I've been to Australia, I've been to New Zealand. It's weird. It's like the Thursday night game comes on at Friday afternoon. It feels like it's in the past, even though it's live. maybe this idea to him that like, well, you've got to be complete in this way. Maybe he just doesn't see it that way. Because let's say I suddenly realize that I have like a great skill at cricket. Like I'm great at cricket. I had no idea. I'm just great at it. And I go to India and I'm playing cricket or whatever. There might be things about that sport that the cricket culture really understands that to me is like, I'm not worried about that. Because he doesn't really even talk about this. At least to my, like, he's like, don't worry about it. Seems to be his reaction. So.
Yeah, it's been a weird thing to watch. You know, it's been a weird thing to watch. I had a COVID question. I was talking to your former Grantland mate, Andrew Sharp, and we were talking about how we hate hearing anybody talk about COVID-19, but for some reason hearing you talk about it would be interesting because I haven't. Years and years ago, the first time I ever spoke to you on a podcast, it was in 2011 when the Penn State thing was happening. And you mentioned that it was so different because if that story had happened 15 years before, when we saw the story, it would have been like this finished product. But instead, we were watching every draft. Every story that would come out is like an update of that story. And it's sort of hard to relearn what is true and what is untrue. And I sort of wonder what you think about how the story of COVID has been covered and how this may have been different if it happened 25 years ago without the constant updating in the internet.
Well, one thing that is interesting is I have friends at the Mayo Clinic and I have some friends who are doctors, and I've talked to them a lot about this. And the one thing that they always tell me is that you can't overlook that this is called the novel coronavirus. Like, it literally is this new thing. And it's so rare now in the scientific community that we deal with something this that like this widespread, that it's completely unknown. That the only way to really learn anything is to just guess about it and see if that guess can be repeated enough times that it starts becoming some kind of reality. If it had been, say, 25 years ago, if this had happened in the 90s, our understanding of it would be much more anecdotal. It would be things you heard from other people. So like now, let's say a 24-year-old person dies from COVID. Like, it is on social media, it is a national story, and everyone is like, oh my God, a 24-year-old person can die from this, or anything, you know? Where if it were anecdotal, I think that there would be much less fear about it, but also probably better behavior. Because now that it has sort of been turned into a political thing, which everything does now, but like this is, the only thing anyone talked about prior to the, George Floyd stuff was the only thing anyone talked about for all this time. It pushes people to the polls. Like the people who are like, if you see people like driving a car on the interstate wearing a mask. Like that's like somebody who's like they've obviously went like beyond, like they don't really they haven't read about why we're wearing masks, like what the idea is. Like they just think that the mask means something about who they are. If you see someone not wearing a mask and annoyed that people think that they should, like in a yogurt restaurant or whatever, it's like that is somebody who is sort of seems to be going through life thinking that all information is a lie, and that they just have to figure out to what degree that untruth is, like they're just trying to weigh that stuff. So I do think that in many ways, maybe the response to this would be better if it had been 25 years ago. But at the same time, I felt like this COVID period is one of the few times where I was like, well, Twitter's actually maybe socially good, because it's like there was a sense for a while, like I had never experienced in my life. Like I followed the news so closely my whole life, and COVID made me realize that the news never affected me. So there was always distance from it. There was no news that really, and now it does, you know? And it was nice to be able to be like, well, I want to read about this right now. Like it's 2 a.m, but I want to read about this right now. Oh, things are happening. I don't know if this answered your question or even what your question was.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. It's interesting. Like if you were in, New Orleans in 2005, then the news would matter to you because you're finding out.
Yes. But I was. If I'd been in New York in 9/11, it would. But I was in Akron. Like I had never, like, I guess like growing up in North Dakota, it'd be like, oh, there's a blizzard happening or whatever. Like there's I guess that affected me. But this was a different deal where the thing everyone was talking about was also integrated into my life. Whereas, like, when everyone was talking about Monica Lewinsky, the only integration in my life was the degree to which I wanted to integrate it. Like, this was the first time that I had no agency over my, and this is what people would say, like, well, that's privilege. Like, you are an example of privilege. Like, I guess that is true. I was privileged that, to me, the news used to be something that I was interested in, not something that I ever thought about as having a factor in my life. I mean, I would never said that. This had to happen for me to realize that.
Mm-hmm. How do you think, because you have kids, right? You're living with your kids now?
2. Yeah, I have 2 kids.
How do you think, like, this period of being away from people for months, I mean, it's going to change people in different ways, but, like, how will that, fuck up the next generation? Like, in some sense, is this their, like, World War II? Like,
well, here's a great example of it. So Ozzy Osbourne has a memoir. And one of the things he talks about in that memoir is how, London got bombed in Birmingham. He's from Birmingham, and it got all bombed out. And he was like a little kid. And he was like, this is awesome. There was all these amazing things to play with. Like these buildings that used to exist were now playgrounds or whatever. His memory of the consequences of World War II was like, this is fun. My son's reaction to the coronavirus is, I like this virus. Like he's happy. My daughter and him have never been happier. Like they're with us all the time. That it's like, it's me, my wife, and my 2 kids in our life. We've never had a life like this. I believe for him, his memory of this period is going to be positive. He's going to maybe remember this as the one time when the attention of my parents was total. So I think now, let's say he was a little older. Let's say he was 13, 14, 15, 16. I think the consequence for those people is that it's going to accelerate what people have been talking about for 20 years. Which is that people have a relationship online or through their phone that has become a surrogate for human contact. And I think that this is going to normalize that experience because there's no pressure now. If your kid is if your teenager is on their phone all day, you can't say to them, put that down, go out and see Jimmy or whatever. That's not how it is. Like now there's just like, well, that's the only option. And I suspect that for a lot of people, it's going to become the preferable option. One thing that I have noticed is that I think it's a little less now, but when COVID was first happening, people would be like, oh, let's have a Zoom party or whatever. Like my friends that I work with in my college newspaper, like we get together once a year usually, but we rarely talk on the phone. We, sometimes we, talk on email. But someone was like, let's all do these Zoom talks. And it's like, well, so we never talked before, but now because we literally can't talk, we must, And I think that some people see that as almost preferable. It's almost as though the responsibility of relationships is gone. Like you don't really have to have an intertwining of your life and your friend's life. You can completely control it. It's friendship on your terms. And I do wonder if that, there's some things I do worry about. Like, let's say this goes on longer than we even think. Let's say this goes into 2022. It does concern me that bar culture could sort of evaporate. Like, I have 2 kids. I'm almost 50. I don't go to the bar that much anymore. But from the time I was 21 to the time I was 40, going to the bar was my life in a way. Like, it was like everything about it was built toward that experience. The idea that people could be like, we don't really do that anymore. Like, that's kind of because this isn't that's like a fad. Like, that's within hundreds of years that was the case. You can go England and Ireland, you see, like, when they opened those bars in Dublin, man, you saw footage of that. People were like walking to these bars going like, "Mama, I'm home," or whatever. Like, it's so ingrained in their life that, like, you couldn't kill it. Like, it could be like, you could not go to the bar in Ireland for 10 years. And when that ended, people would immediately rush back. In the United States, I don't know. It's a little different here. Like, people are very willing to do what everyone is doing. And if that changes, or like shaking hands, for example, will people be less willing? I don't know. I know it's not a big deal. I know it's not like a huge loss, but like, there are not many acts that are less than 2 seconds long that are sort of saturated with more meaning than shaking someone's hand. It means so many things. When you're a little kid, do you remember when you were a little kid and you kind of learned to shake hands and you and your friends would like shake hands? Like, that's a great memory for me. I would be very disappointed if the idea of shaking hands disappeared. It could. It could. I mean, that could happen.
Shaking hands is over. I suggested finger guns. Maybe finger guns could replace it. The one, right?
Nothing replaces it. Nothing replaces it, because it has all of these meanings. It's a formal exchange in a casual situation. You shake your friend's hand at a concert. It's like, it's the one part of that evening. It's like, this is a formal thing. I'm greeting you the same way I would greet you if we met on the floor of the Senate. It also has to do with the strength of your handshake and the idea of someone who tries to intimidate you with a powerful handshake, or just this idea that, like, sometimes you maybe shake with 2 hands. All of these things, the idea of shaking someone's hand if you're in a romantic situation, that kind of means that this isn't really a date. Like, I'm shaking your hand. Like, it has all these sort of meanings that I can't fathom any of your suggestions being able to sort of replace that. I have a friend who's like, what about bowing? Like they do in the Far East or whatever, it's like bowing or whatever. And that's like, it's not the same, because it is somebody else's tradition that we would be adopting.
The thing that you said that worries me is you talk about the normalizing of people sort of controlling the relationships and things happening online, is when I see people talking about, well, who would ever want to go back to an office again? And I think to myself, now maybe it's because I like my job, but the act of seeing people in person and collaborating in person, to me, is so much better. By a million% better, that the idea of people no longer meeting in person to collaborate seems like an enormous mistake. And that's what bothers me.
Well, I don't know if it's a mistake, but I will say this. Okay. So the thing about an office that I feel like that even I miss, like I don't miss it that much. I haven't worked in an office since 2006. I wouldn't want to go back. I like working in my cabin or whatever. But I will say this. The years I worked in newspapers, the happiest time of my life was the years I was at Spin. What it did is it created friendships between people who in any other circumstance would have no relationship. That you're with, like you're connected by this job, and it might even be that you do very different things. You're a writer, she, designs pages or whatever. Like it's like there's no kind of intellectual connection, but you're together and you have the same friends and the same enemies and the same problems, and you can always have something to talk about. And then you go to the bar for the first time and you both get drunk together, and suddenly you're good. Like this person you just sort of used to see across the room, you're now friends or whatever. That would all become something that happens in an online world, which means the kind of people who will become friends are the people who are already kind of alike. You both happen to like, I don't know, whatever television show is popular to like or whatever, or that you're both into deep house music or whatever. And I do think that it would change the possibility of people who would not normally interact becoming close. And to me, that's sort of what you want from culture, is sort of the kind of the melting of different identities into sort of this shared experience. So it would bum me out if there were no more offices and no more bars. I don't think I've met a person in my life who wasn't in an office or a bar. I don't know. I keep thinking about, did I ever meet anybody in any other way? It's like I worked with them or I partied with them. That was it. Like that's, and I have a large circle of friends, but they all come from those two categories.
You mentioned you're in Portland. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about what's going on in Portland as far as the, federal unnamed department agency sort of occupying it and the protests going on there.
I kind of have a weird answer. If it wasn't for the national news, I wouldn't know what was happening. Like I have gotten so many texts from people being like, "Are you okay? What's it like there? What's happening?" As far as I can tell, nothing is different. Like I have heard that downtown Portland now has been completely reinvented. I had a friend of mine said it was kind of like Detroit now, because it's like all these things are boarded up. There are kind of people everywhere on the street. There's a sense of alienation. It's like a volatile place. But I don't go downtown anymore. Like I'm 15 minutes away or whatever, and my neighborhood's exactly the same. So my understanding of what's happening in downtown Portland is your understanding.
Which is bizarre. And I think about that all the time. It's like, ostensibly, nothing has changed in the confines of the four walls of my apartment. But for people that are, out there putting their bodies on the line and being affected by this in a way because of whatever, because it's affected them personally, or because of boundless empathy for people who have been affected by police violence, like going out there, it's like their lives are being changed by this thing. And it's so weird.
Well, or what you're really saying, though,
That's
is
right.
They are changing their lives. You just said that in the confines of your apartment, things are the same. They're choosing this, I mean, right. It's like that's their agency to say, like, I want to be involved in this. And, I don't know. It's an odd, because here in Portland now, it's like the protesting does not stop. Like, I don't know if this is true in any other city in the U.S. It's like it has not stopped since it began. It's like 50 consecutive days or whatever. Like there is the political action here is relentless, And it was interesting for the first 3 years I lived here that was the case, and the people didn't seem to have anything to be resisting as much. Like, it's like they were very there's a high degree of like kind of civic identity here. But it seemed like the thing about living in Portland was like it's an easy place to live, and now everything is different. So it's amazing how small my life is now. I mean, there are many, many days where I see my wife and my kids, and that's it. Yeah. Most days.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I live in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and I work in Philadelphia. And while the protests were going on here, like I've never, I was supportive of them happening, but I've never been so glad that my family was not where it was, like that I was in a place that was away. And that is, part of the privilege of being able to live like that. But it is just amazing how how I think like news coverage can normalize what is happening in a way that makes it seem like it's happening everywhere. Like if I hear about COVID-19 cases going way up in Florida, I think you made this point earlier. 25 years ago, I would have been like, what the fuck's going on in Florida? And now it seems like it's right here, you know? So I covered.
It is. It is an odd thing. I mean, like the only thing I know about Houston right now is
Right.
the uptick in cases. Okay. What percentage of people in Houston are being affected by this? And I don't mean having the illness. I mean like knowing somebody. I don't really have a sense. But it feels like if somebody said like, what's going on in Houston right now, I know what
I'll end with one light Sixers question, because you just have to. The Sixers are the best home team in the league this season.
That's a good question
best
for
by
him.
a lot.
Yeah.
And then like the 22nd best road team in some sense. Do you think that Orlando Hostage Disney is like more of a home game because they don't have to travel, or more of a road game because there's no fans like getting on their ass?
Well, okay, yeah. I have one question first before I answer this, because you would know this more than me. What do you think is the explanation for their success?
The fact that they are held accountable by their lackluster play and not giving everything they have, playing a little bit sloppy, a little bit.
Yeah,
fear.
So
Absolutely,
fear.
absolutely.
Do you think to a degree fear? The batteries could come raining down if it's pretty known what the games are, because it's kind of like these guys are all going to basketball camp now. Mm-hmm. Like I almost imagine 4 games happening at once with one universal clock, mm-hmm. and then it's like, will they be more like? I mean, now. I mean, I don't know. I've always been a bit skeptical of how much the crowd and the intensity of the crowd affects the game itself, because you know, playing on the very small level I did, you know, in high school or whatever, I found that I almost didn't notice the crowd. Like it's like you almost kind of blocked that out once. Like you noticed it during warm-ups and introductions, but you know, it's hard for me to imagine NBA players feeling that way. But then, you know, maybe that proves how like they use that energy in some way. I think that I think it's very possible that the teams that succeed in this bubble are going to be surprising or unorthodox. Like, you know, like, because when you think about it, it's like, will this championship mean anything? Well, honestly, it'll only mean things if it ends up being the Bucks and the Lakers or the Clippers. If anybody else gets in there, it's going to be seen as some anomaly that happened because of this situation. So if the Sixers end up, say, winning the title, which is possible, I mean, like, you know, talent-wise, they're with anybody, you know. I think that it will make this scenario, in a weird way, seem even slightly sillier than it is right now. Not because it's specifically the Sixers, but like, for example, the Blazers, right? People in Vegas are saying, put money on the Blazers. The odds are still really on their side. They have a lot of big guys coming back. Maybe the game will be slowed down. It'll be like, yeah, so if the Blazers win this championship, then it was not a championship at all. I mean, it's like they obviously would not have won the title if the season had continued. To answer your question, will it be more like a home game or will it be more like a road game? It'll be more like an exhibition game. It'll be more like the Hall of Fame game where both teams are on the road. And it will probably be a factor, you know, come down to who can focus more, like who can sort of get beyond the unorthodox nature of what they're doing. Now, does that play to the Sixers' strengths?
Weirdness does, but no specific skill would.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, yeah, they're kind of odd people. Maybe it will seem, you know, they might enjoy the experience. Like, I think teams with a lot of young guys I think that young people might adapt to this more readily than mature teams, because the idea of just like sitting in your room and playing video games will not seem that weird to somebody. But like for somebody like LeBron, he may miss his kids, like especially since he will know that like it'd be weird, for example, if you're like LeBron or somebody and your wife calls and she's like, I think one of our kids is sick. I don't think he has COVID, but it's weird. He's acting strange or whatever. Yeah. That's going to really fuck somebody up, kind of, Whereas if you're, so how many of the Sixers have kids? How many are married? I mean, that's a real question. I think.
Mike Scott, doesn't he?
No, Mike Scott.
I see Mike Scott.
I'm sure Horford does. Like Tobias Harris. Is he single?
Yeah. I see Mike Scott with kids.
Yeah,
is that a nephew? Maybe might be nephew.
To me, that would be a real advantage. It could actually be fun in a way, because it's like you're doing this weird thing, and you're just your whole life is now what was once the center of your life is now the totality of your life. So, I mean, arrogant. I don't know. That's actually, you're the first person who's asked me that. If it's more like a home game or a road game, my initial response would be like, well, it's more like a road game, but it can't be a road game for everybody.
This is the final crux of the Sixers, is they, popular team coming into the season, clunky fit, but usually talent wins out. The Sixers were totally different teams on the road and at home. So which one is the real team? And so if there's a version of this that the real team was the home team when they're engaged, then they're engaged for this 8-game plus a playoff run, then you have a little more faith. Or if that's just a sample size fluke.
What do you guys think will happen if this is the case? Like, I heard for some of these games they're going to use 20 cameras.
Yeah.
And they won't have to worry about being in sight lines or anything, Like, what if this game is filled, like every game is like the Kobe Bryant documentary or whatever, where we're getting this super intense, kind of close to the bone footage and hearing the guys talk, and the games are better. Like, let's say it's more fun to watch, because some people have said with these golf tournaments, I haven't been following it, but like my brother-in-law is a big golfer. He's like, this is so much better than watching golf. He loves it. He loves hearing the guy talk to the caddy and all that shit. It will be interesting if we watch these NBA games and somehow it's more fun, because then it will be like, maybe we should do all of this in a studio.
You've been generous with your time. Is it okay if I ask you one more real question? Okay.
Sure.
This is completely unrelated to what but I was thinking of it this morning while I was running, and I felt like I had to ask you. So, have you seen the movie Room 237?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So
a couple
for
times.
anyone listening, it's about The Shining, and it's basically about these 3 or 4, I forget how many, people who have convinced themselves that The Shining is about something other than what the story's about. One is apologizing to Native Americans. One is about Kubrick faking the moon landing, whatever. And what
One's about the Holocaust.
What I took away from the movie was, it's not about any of these things, but if you look for something and you truly believe it, you can find what you want out of it. And then I was listening to Tom DeLonge is doing a podcast now. Tom DeLonge, who quit Blink-182 to prove that there are UFOs and aliens, and has made some headway in the last few years.
Yeah. More than I would have thought he made.
He broke the story, right? He got the government to admit, oh boy, there were fucking flying saucers. We don't know what they were. I wonder if all of this evidence, do you think, is more likely that it is a confluence of happenstance that, if you put it all together and look for it enough, makes it look like these things have happened and we know about these things, like in Room 237? Or do you think it is more likely that all of these facts are really pointing toward the fact that there's something that has been here that is not of this world?
Well, okay, after I saw Room 237, I actually wrote a piece for Grantland about it. Because to me, what it seemed to be introducing is this idea, which I call immersion criticism, which is to me like something that could not have existed up until really the 90s. This idea that like you're not watching a movie once, you're not watching it twice, you're not watching it 10 times, you're watching it hundreds and hundreds of times, where you can pay attention to things in the scene that it is very possible that even someone as a perfectionist like Stanley Kubrick was not paying attention to. Incongruities in shots or whatever that somehow got, and it's just almost this, it's a new kind of way to appreciate things, which is not what the movie is. It's not even what the director intended. It's not even what you as the viewer project upon it. But it's this idea that if you take all of this data and you just almost like put it into a machine, it will create potential conclusions. And once you pick that conclusion, you can then go back and watch the film another 100 times, this time looking for that conclusion to be validated. I don't think that it is a reflection on the creator or the artist. Like Stanley Kubrick, when he made The Shining, could not have imagined anyone watching this movie more than 100 times. Because he would be like, well, they could go to it every day in the theater, and then they could buy a reel-to-reel and watch it. But like it would be impossible to make a film where the idea to understand it requires 100 viewings. But people can do that now. So what does that mean? Well, it sort of means, I guess, that that there is kind of what we were talking about earlier with Execute Again, a value to repetition that allows you to have an experience that is impossible to understand in a solitary way. Like the repetition is the experience, not The Shining, like the thing about the guy from Blink-182, I don't know. I think that was just something where he was crazy, and sometimes crazy guys are right. But it's like, yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I look forward to, you get to talk to me for a whole other hour in a week. So,
well, yeah, there'll be questions at that thing too, though, and I tend to get a lot of questions at these things.
That's exciting.
You probably won't have to work that hard.
Good. So that you can sign up for. Just go to RightsToRickySanchez.com. This post, and you can sign up for that. And I mentioned the promo code for the book. We would be remiss if we didn't ask you. And we've been like when we mentioned you were going to be on the pod. One of our good friends of the pod that listens to the pod, a gentleman named we only know him as Kill a Cow, often talked about your podcast with Chris Ryan. Music Exists. And he waited for the end to find out whether you determined whether music exists or not. So what do you think the final verdict is?
Well, the podcast wasn't called Does Music Exist? What the fuck? Real genius insight by that guy. It's like, this podcast called Music Exists. Does it exist? It's like, yeah. Well, good for that guy.
Well, man,
his name, did he kill a cow? Is someone who killed a cow? Is that what his thing is?
Yeah, I don't. His last name is sort of like that. I think I don't know what it's.
Oh, I thought maybe it's like he was famous because he killed a cow. Because it's like there was always, I don't know if this is true or not, but they used to say that the reason the Crips were called the Crips is because one of the kind of founding members crippled a guy. So they called themselves the Crips. I don't know if that's true. That could be totally urban legend. So I thought maybe this guy, this famous kill a cow guy, it's like he killed a cow, and people are like, guy, we need him.
He's going to become his whole personality.
Well, I love the book, and I love your fiction. I've mentioned before, I think Invisible Man is the best book you wrote. It feels like you love the fiction, and it makes me like it more. And I thought this book was great, too. And I appreciate your time today.
I appreciate both.
Thank you, man.
Guys.
Chuck Helvetica.
Okay.
Well, there he is, Mr. Chuck Klosterman. The second appearance on the Ricky, 4 years apart. We're still doing this. Should we say who's going to be on the pod on Saturday? I feel like it's locked in, and if it isn't, that'll be his fault if he doesn't come on.
Oh, you, man. This is your guest.
Daryl Morey will be on the podcast.
Long time coming.
Long time coming. Got a lot to discuss with Daryl Morey.
I don't believe it's going to happen.
I do. Yeah, he started tweeting about the Yang talking about Hinky story, and then somebody
he wants to get in there.
Tagged us. Yeah, we got to ask him about that. So
there you go.
Daryl Morey on Saturday. So thanks, Chuck. Get the book, sign up for the thing on Wednesday. That's it. Are you down with TTP?
Yeah, you know Lickface.
If you don't fuck with me,
then I won't fuck with you.
If you don't fuck with me, then I won't fuck with you.
If you don't fuck with me, then I won't fuck with you.
If you don't fuck with me,
then I won't fuck with you.
But if you fuck with me,
I'm gonna fucking kill you!
Time for plan B.